Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give it a couple minutes for everyone to kind of trickle in. So, in the meantime, please feel free to use the chat to share where you're from or where you're sitting right now and maybe who you're rooting for in the World Cup. I think, Michael, I think there's no question who you're rooting for.
Yep. I think my choice is very clear.
Quite clear. So we thought it would be fun given that I believe today is the first day that the games are officially kicking off. Ironically, there was a pre-match that was held where I'm currently sitting, which is Chicago, US versus Germany. US did not win, unfortunately. But it was great to see the German team in Chicago, and I was just kind of like following them around on social media, which was fun just to see the excitement. And we have a lot of teams that fly in through O'Hare International Airport, so they're getting a huge welcoming as different teams land in this area. So it's really, really fun. So we'll just give it another minute or so, and then Michael and I will officially kick off today. It's great to see that the chat is active. Please don't be shy. We'd love to see your engagement and we really appreciate you. Oh, there we go.
Debunk.
Definitely different, a lot of fans from around the world, which is wonderful to see. So it's fun. And I love the theme song, by the way, this year, which is Shakira's Dai Dai, I believe it's called. She does a great job. It like gets you going and it's pumped up and fun. So love that. Okay, we'll give it a couple, about 30 seconds. And
See a
then,
lot of people around the world. That's really good. And I see quite a lot of people from our neighbor country, Netherlands. Very
yes.
good. So my family is actually one quarter Dutch. So that's probably the other shirt I could have worn.
Wonderful. Oh, look at that. So fun. Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. We're going to go ahead and kick off, if that's all right with everybody. And this is being recorded as well. So you will be able to access this recording and the deck after this call. So, first and foremost, I'm Kira Rubiano. I am a partner at Payrollminds, which is a global payroll consulting firm that specializes in strategic advisory, global payroll transformation, and payroll staff augmentation. I'm based in Chicago, Illinois, but originally from Belarus. And I've spent nearly 20 years working in the global payroll space across a number of global payroll service providers within client advisory and in payroll leadership. I've supported hundreds of clients across different sizes, regions, industries, and I've also seen global payroll operations in over 100 countries and managed payroll teams across the world. So I'm very pleased to be co-presenting today with Michael Yenton from UKG. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Michael Jetten. I'm based in Germany. That's probably what you can see in my shirt. I'm Senior Director of Value Advisory at UKG. We deliver and implement HCM solutions, payroll, workforce management, HR around the world. So I'm in constant conversation with leaders around the world to discuss exactly about these topics. Roughly, probably 17 years in the HCM business. Didn't plan that, to be honest. So I had like an coincidentally landed in HR and payroll, I think, after my studies. So I worked before in UKG for an HR and payroll outsourcer and was responsible there for the P&L and for the shared services for HR and payroll for our big customers with around about 100,000 employees, 40 plus countries. So I'm feeling with everybody here on the call who is managing a multinational environment where basically every single day there it feels like there is a payroll running and there's some stress coming up the line. So happy to be with you guys today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. So today, Michael and I will be really leaning on our practical experience to really set the tone for the conversation today. Next slide, please. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So, global payroll is one of those areas where the headline can sound and seem simple, but the operational reality is far from that, from simple. We often hear statements like, we have 99% payroll accuracy and we need one global provider. And if the vendor owns local engines, compliance must be stronger. And on the surface, those statements sound logical, measurable, and even executive friendly, but they only tell part of the story. So it's really important to know that some of the most widely accepted beliefs are also the ones worth questioning. And when you get a closer look to the actual payroll operation, and you're looking at the country teams, you're looking at cutoffs, exceptions, reconciliations, employee queries, vendor escalations, those assumptions really start to break down. Now, I've seen and have worked with organizations where a dashboard, right, can seem green and great, but the payroll team was doing Herculean work behind the scenes. I've also seen companies rush toward a payroll strategy and then have to stop and redesign their transformation approach, which of course is costly in many, many ways. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So, why does this conversation matter? I think we can all agree that payroll is mission critical. It affects employee trust, compliance, cash flow, employee experience, and of course, business continuity. Yet payroll is often evaluated through metrics or assumptions that don't fully reflect the operating model health. And even if a payroll can be green on the dashboard, it still can be held together by manual workarounds. And a company can have multiple providers and still create good visibility. And a provider can own their engine and still have challenges with service quality, expertise, and flexibility. Now, something that Michael and I want to make really clear is that today is not about an anti-SLA, anti-consolidation, anti-owned engine conversation. That is not what we're here to discuss today. They all have value, but none alone guarantees payroll health. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Next slide, please. So today we will challenge three assumptions. One, which is payroll accuracy equals payroll health, which we see in front of you today. Two, which is visibility requires full consolidation. And three, engine ownership guarantees better outcomes. And for each myth, we will discuss what the assumption gets right, where it can be misleading, and what payroll leaders should examine instead. We really believe that better payroll strategy starts with better questions. Not just did payroll run, but what did it take to make it run? So, Michael, is there anything you'd like to add before we kick off myth one?
Yeah, I think what you said is exactly what I see as well. So there's a lot of question around, okay, what are the hidden things you probably cannot measure or you don't measure in the classical SLAs and the classical numbers? So I think that is really one of the key challenges I see to find the right key performance indicators, KPIs, right? To measure what's going on really in the performance on the payroll side. And I think that nicely leads into the first myth, right, Kira? So we can maybe elaborate on some of the pitfalls we see if you look just at the classical SLAs.
Thank you so much, Michael. So let's start with the metric that many organizations rely on the most, pay accuracy. Now, accuracy is extremely important in payroll, right? Nothing short of perfect is acceptable. I always used to say that. Nothing short of perfect is acceptable. But the issue is, what are we actually measuring when we say the payroll is accurate? Are we measuring the final output file? Are we measuring employee pay against contractual entitlements? How many corrections happened before final approval, or how many reruns had to happen before final approval, or the cost of getting that accurate result? what are we actually measuring? Because a final payroll SLA may measure the finish line, but not the effort or the rework or the cost required to get there. Next slide, please. So one thing that's really important to note is what can a SLA hide? And a final payroll SLA can often hide upstream dysfunction, okay, particularly in input quality. This is where organizations struggle the most. It's that source to gross process. Why is that the case? Because in that source to gross process, you often have a multitude of different source systems and data, right? You might have different requirements per country from a payroll perspective. You may have a lot of scrubbing and manual data intervention that has to happen, and analysis. You could have a lot of handoffs, and of course, our favorite late inputs. And so that dysfunction can also hide manual fixes, exception handling, undiscovered errors, missed inputs, and a dependency on a lot of different people. And this is where organizations continue to struggle the most. So I'd like to use an example. I've seen this numerous times, also when I've overseen payroll operations and in working with clients. Let's use the example of commission inputs being provided by HR too late for payroll cutoff, okay? And payroll proceeds to process payroll. The payroll is processed, everything gets paid on time, and it's accurate by all standards because payroll processed what they had. But those commissions never made it to payroll. So although the SLA, the final SLA may look green because everything was processed that was given, the employee experience is not positive. Another example is, and this happens often, I myself have been a in-country partner, so I know from experience that your team is working with a provider that unfortunately makes a lot of mistakes. And so payroll has to constantly be rerun. Okay, it's being rerun and rerun, and maybe it takes 4 to 5 times before it finally gets approved. Now, the SLA may show green because final accuracy was 99.9% and everything was paid on time, but the team's experience was extremely poor, and it caused a lot of anxiety and challenges and frustration for the team. On the flip side, I have worked with a lot of clients where we have had to present metrics. There have been organizations that their approach to input timeliness and accuracy is a little bit more lax, and that of course has an immense impact on providers and their ability to deliver SLA metrics. So if an organization that's working with a provider also is not very tight with their process and their timelines, that's going to affect the provider and their ability to meet their SLAs as well. So we have to make sure that we're always conscious of that. So when I oversaw a team that ran payroll in over 100 countries, I can tell you with 100% certainty, they were jumping through hoops all the time. We had more than 70 local providers, 60 workflow steps for each country at minimum with customization based on that country. But global payroll accuracy was at 99% and above. However, it took countless hours of hard work and rework because we had so many challenges in that input quality source to gross process, and we had a lot of dysfunction. And one of the things that we decided to do as an organization was we wanted to launch a time and motion study to show leadership where that time was being spent on manual processes, as well as where there was disconnect between departments, particularly disconnect with HR. And we were able to then isolate where we had our time killers And those time killers were in that gathering of the input process. It was in the manual interventions. It was in the scrubbing of the data, as well as we discovered challenges in the reconciliation process. And then we were able to start putting and applying fixes to those areas so that we can create some optimization and streamline. So before I hand it over to Michael, I do want to encourage everyone to celebrate accuracy SLAs because it is wonderful that we can hit those 99.98%. But make sure you take the time to understand what it took to get there. Ask yourself, how many manual interventions happen each cycle? Is payroll struggling with late inputs on a regular basis? How many off cycles are we processing? And where is the team spending time that leadership never sees? Next slide, please. Michael, what have you seen with the organizations that you work with around payroll SLAs?
I think what you just described, it remembers me exactly about the situation. I had several times with customers from the HR side. You got that big screen with all the green SLAs, all to 100%. And then you went back and said, well, that's not the feeling I'm hearing from the team. So there's like a mismatch between what you see in the numbers provided, maybe from the payroll provider, and what you see in reality and the stress level you get from your team. And I think one thing you mentioned, Kira, is really key to that. And we know all of that, right? So garbage in, garbage out, that's the old saying in payroll. We say that since many years, but still true, that is the main source of issues, the input. And I think if you look at that picture over here, which is very high level payroll process, whereas I know that every payroll calendar on every single country is much more detailed. But if you look at that high level flow from left to right, I think you see exactly what you described where it goes wrong very often. And I think what I've realized, at least with many payroll providers in the past, when I managed to share services, is actually that you send the inputs over the month. For example, you have new hires, you have some changes, you have a contract change, maybe a transfer, maybe somebody gets an increase, all of that stuff, maybe even some tariff changes during the month in certain countries. So you deliver them upon the month until the HR cutoff. What happens then is, I can understand that from a workload perspective, from the payroll team and also from the vendor at the back end, they pick up these changes only after the HR cutoff. So everything has been delivered, then it's picked up, it's processed. And that time window between HR cutoff and then the final or the first payroll run, that's actually a very short time window. And again, I can understand from a provider perspective, it's easy to say, yeah, you delivered the wrong input, you miss the bonus payments, so they are not being considered in the first run. But like you described, I think that is lies for the SLA, that's green. It's just out of that picture. But at the end, the employee impact, that is not considered over there, right? Because there is a commitment between the company and the employee that you get your commission on a certain month or that you get a certain tariff increase after the tariff negotiations with the unions. So that is one thing which is not visible in the SLA, but it's actually showing then as a direct employee impact, which is hitting hard. And I think when you look at that, that is exactly where I think the problems start, right? You make that compromise and say, okay, what is on the first payroll run? You then maybe try, and we all know what happens, to get these inputs into the final payroll run at least, right? So you're trying to jungle in between the runs, which is even a shorter period, to convince the provider, hey, can you bring in my inputs I forgot? Or can you basically take the corrected file and upload it for this payroll? Because it has a big impact. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes not. Now, the downside is then, well, very often you probably need to pay, like you said, for an off-cycle payroll run, or you need to do some down payments after the pay date because you need to correct it. And that has a lot of implications. So a tail of administrative tasks coming on top, right? Because I'm thinking about Germany only. If you do a correction, yeah, I should have received my payment in March and I get that only in April. Well, I need to make a retro calculation for the month before. I need to produce the payslip again. I need to correct everything. The authorities need to be informed and so on. And that is actually the same in every single European country, for example. Right? So that is really, I think, where the problem lies and where things can change, because it shouldn't be the situation that these inputs are collected and that the pressure then in a short time frame is accelerated. And there should be really that's I think one of the areas where improvement is required to get down the efforts, get down the stress, and at the end, the cost, like you correctly described, Kira, right? Now, if we go a step further and maybe go to the next slide, there we see actually an interesting study we did together with KPMG this year. And what that identified is part of that hidden total cost of ownership, because I think that is exactly what is the kind of link or the missing part between the SLAs, the green picture, and the feeling. And to unfold that and to shed some light on that, that is actually, I think, some of the key activities we need to do in the next months, years. And what we saw is actually that the biggest key financial area, which is the concern of the companies, is the payroll leakage. Now, payroll leakage, you guys know that represents basically unintended loss of revenue, unexpected costs caused by improper handling of payroll processes. So anything which is basically leaking and hurting the accuracy of the payroll. It could be overpayment, underpayment, incorrect taxing, and so on. So everything in that direction. Our interesting part is that we figured out that from all the companies we requested, and we talked about that, they actually said that the leakage is between 1 and 4%. Now, if you think about that, that 1%, if you take a company with 50,000 employees, it's huge. Exactly. It's 10 to 15 million, however you calculate it. If you take that times 4, I mean, you all can do the math, it's around about 40 to 60 million. So that is definitely worth an investment, right? And the problem is that many times that kind of leakage is hidden, so you can't see it. You need to create some visibility around that and really make sure that you unfold what's actually happening in that process and you don't just look at these classical SLAs which are not showing that. Now, I think that leads nicely into the second myth, Kira. So if we look at that, so we know there is a problem, we know there is a hidden part. So what can companies do actually in that direction?
Wonderful. Next slide, please.
I think maybe one thing to add here. So if we look at that, I think the answer I got in the past, and that's probably a little bit from my previous job and my previous role coming from outsourcing. What I got as an answer all the time is when somebody asked me from a company, okay, what can we do to actually create visibility, right? And the answer was always, for my company and many companies, hey, you know what? If you outsource everything to us, if you migrate all your payrolls to us, you will get visibility after that. Now, I think that is quite an hard exercise to get visibility and quite a risky exercise as well. So maybe from that perspective, because I know, Kira, you are involved very early stage with the customers. So before we even get hit by RFPs, for example, and a vendor is requested. So what is the discussion you're having with the customers?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. So, as you have been explaining, the conversation has changed now, right? Visibility and control don't require full payroll overhaul. Okay. Like maybe it used to, let's say 5 years ago or so. That used to be I would say, the approach 5 to 10 years ago. And this is a common misconception when organizations jump into the vendor selection process prematurely. They often treat consolidation as an answer before diagnosing the real problems at hand. And so when I speak with organizations, I encourage them to do something called a current state assessment first and foremost to truly understand their payroll landscape. Now, what does a current state assessment mean? It means that you really understand how your payroll org is functioning. What are your processes that are being undertaken by payroll? Which departments are involved in those processes? How is payroll standardized across your different jurisdictions? And where is it customized? Right, by that country, who is handling your taxes? What other services are being provided by your providers today? There is, and I can honestly say, there's probably hundreds of questions that people like myself can ask you around understanding your payroll landscape. But I have seen far too often organizations not do that and then simply just jump right in to say, okay, we're overhauling and we don't even know why and what's really happening on the ground. And that is very costly. The reality is that you are now able to gain visibility with smart technology, strong governance, and clear understanding of your current landscape. Um, One thing that once again, I just want to reaffirm that our discussion today is not an anti consolidation discussion by any means. It's really more about understanding what options are out there now that align with your reality and your strategy. And as I mentioned, I've worked with organizations in my advisory capacity and also when I've worked at a service provider capacity where they chose to overhaul all of payroll, whether it is they moved from a model where they were working with different providers in every country to full consolidation, or maybe they were consolidated already with one provider and moved to another, and it works well for them. And that's great. And there's others who have decided, no, you know what? We're happy with our local providers or how we're running today, and we just want that additional visibility layer. Or some that kind of do a hybrid approach, right? Hybrid is now very common, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So it all comes down to understanding your current landscape and determining what it is that you need and want to optimize. But you have to understand that first. You have to diagnose before changing everything. You have to do that. Not every country needs a change. Not every country needs an overhaul. Some countries are very stable and are working well, and forcing migration can cause unnecessary disruption. And it can also, aside from being costly and disruptive, it could also damage future buy-in for transformation if your team is exhausted and isn't a part of a willing participant in that process. And at the same time, as I mentioned, some countries do not need intervention. And a strong strategy will distinguish between both. And I've worked with organizations that are unhappy with their current providers and they want one throat to choke. We hear that often. I just want one throat to choke. And if that is aligned with your payroll strategy, then that might be the right approach for you and your organization. But a visibility layer can often be built across a mixed provider landscape through data mappings, controls, and of course, reporting, and can be a very strong solution if you're not ready for that full blown overhaul. And of course, from an advisory perspective, we always recommend a phased approach when it comes to any sort of solution that you roll out. And so, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we are seeing more and more organizations turn to building a visibility layer first rather than moving forward with a full blown overhaul, or maybe even applying a hybrid approach is another way. So it's important to ask yourself a couple questions. One, which is which countries are truly underperforming versus they're just kind of different? Do we have a good understanding of our current state and where the challenges lie? And are we changing because we just need visibility, or are we changing because we want to fully overhaul our payroll operations? And does consolidation feel cleaner on paper than it does in real life? So those are the types of questions that you should be asking yourself when you are trying to determine what is the best approach for your organization and your service delivery model as you move forward. Michael, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, there's one thing I think which is directly popping up to my mind when I think about Europe. Obviously, when you talk about visibility, is exactly, I think, the phased approach, right? Getting an understanding what you want to change, what is the situation at the moment, where do I want to optimize, and probably come to a full outsource model. Is it maybe that I have a hybrid model, which is what we see much more? I think in Europe, we have one compelling event as well currently, which is hitting
Yes.
very hard, right? So the CSRD Payroll Transparency Directive reporting. Now that is actually to be delivered as of next year, so 27, on the data from 26. So exactly what you described. I think there is no time now to think about kind of a big outsourcing for 40 to 100 countries. You need to think about, okay, how do I deliver on that directive in the next year and get my data straight this year? And I think that is one of the key things I'm seeing where companies need to prepare and probably sometimes underestimate what is the effort to actually get that reporting straight. And then maybe an argument saying that, well, currently there's no enforcement, there are no penalties. To be honest, I think we've seen it with GDPR. The enforcement is coming very quick and the enforcement is coming very hard. So it's basically the responsibility now, I think, for us to really get the data straight in the 26 year and probably thinking about how can we report on it, how we can get visibility, fulfill our duties. And when we start doing that, then thinking about the overall strategy as a phased approach like you described.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael, for that. And that's really important. So, adding that global visibility layer can definitely bring you um, the needed support you need from a global reporting standpoint, especially with these types of directives that are coming in. I think this month, actually, they're coming into full effect across Europe. So, thank you for that. Next slide, please, as we move on to our third myth around engine ownership. Oh, one slide back, please. Thank you so much. Right there. Perfect. Engine ownership guaranteeing better outcomes. So the myth is that providers who own local payroll engines globally have the highest degree of local compliance and payroll expertise. Now, engine ownership is often positioned as a major differentiator in the global payroll space, especially. And to be fair, there are reasons why that message resonates. If a provider owns their own local engine, it can often mean tighter controls, faster updates, quicker turnaround in terms of being able to process payroll, and fewer third party dependencies and handoffs. So that is 100% a possibility, right? When a provider owns their local engine. And this is a very, very hot topic in vendor assessments and vendor selection. But the key here is to be mindful that owning an engine does not automatically equal payroll expertise, service quality, or long term fit. Okay. The engine is a calculator in the back end. Payroll outcomes are delivered by people, local expertise, and the controls around it. And that local compliance knowledge often sits with payroll professionals, not just the software. Something else that's really important to note here is that providers that heavily invest in their own proprietary engines may have limited incentive to make changes to those engines as clients' needs evolve. You know, if a client is going through excessive growth, M&A, new jurisdictions, so what fits today may not fit tomorrow. And based on my experience, and like I said, I have worked at organizations with their own proprietary engines. I've also supported clients who have used different types of providers across the world that own their own engines and those that don't. And one thing is that providers who own their own local engines very much so often can deliver strong expertise, quick turnaround, and a positive customer experience. Don't get me wrong, that is absolutely a possibility, but some do not. Okay. And from a client's perspective, the experience is not defined by who owns the engine. It's really about who gets their employees paid correctly. And are payroll issues resolved accurately? And does the vendor understand my business? And are my teams getting responses timely? And what is my experience at the end of the day? Not necessarily what's happening in the engine, right? So that client experience is really, really important. So I always say the better question to ask yourself is not who owns the engine, but who owns the outcome? Who owns the outcome? And some of the things that you can ask providers who say they have proprietary engines, and those that don't, it's how are the statutory updates being managed and validated? How strong is your local expertise behind the tech? How are exceptions being handled? How transparent is the provider about their own limitations on their technology? Michael, I'd love to bring you in on this conversation and hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right what you said, and it reminds me about something I experienced in my past. And I think it's right what you said. I think there are different things to be considered. You have it nicely over here: people, process, governance, and technology. I think that's the combination of things which counts. Now, if you think about the payroll ownership or the payroll engine ownership, so the calculator ownership, like you described it nicely, I think, that feels in the beginning when you make a selection very secure, right? At the moment where you take the decision, at the moment where you are with your company. Now, what I've seen is actually that means, and like you described, very often that could be a risk for the future and a lack of flexibility. Because at the end, what you see is that obviously the vendor invested in that engine, they bought it, they bought that calculator. So they are stuck to that in a sense, and they want to invest in that one calculator, and they will not swap the calculator if you and your business is changing. And that is what I experienced many years ago when well, we had like a process in an Asian country around meal allowances. Quite simple process. People need to hand in stuff and it need to be uploaded to the system and then calculated for payroll outcome. Now, the problem was that when we started with the vendor, they owned the engine in that country. It was a relatively small business from our side. So we had a couple of hundred people. And for that, it worked how they processed these claims. And they did that in a manual way. Now, then 2 years later, we basically had an acquisition. So the company bought another company, the big company, and suddenly we had thousands of people in that country. So theoretically, the process was still offered by that vendor at that moment, but the problem was they didn't have technology to do it at scale. And they didn't have really the opportunity to have something like a portal available for the people, the support team actually around that to help people to process the claims and then also do the right deductions and so on. That was a big part for us. And we were really months and years in discussion with that vendor. What can we do? They were obviously trying their best and throwing a lot of people into that and saying, well, yeah, we can help you with more people. But at the same time, we felt, they are making losses on that. We are not solving it because more people means also more risk for manual errors, which is basically what happened. And at the end, we had like a situation we couldn't reconcile the data anymore. We had really big issues with the employees at the end. So I think that is an example where you see that it's maybe in the beginning was the right decision, but because nowadays the business is changing so fast and we have so many things in the business which are impacting, we need also the payroll to be that flexible for the future, right? And I know you cannot switch a payroll in 1 month or something, that's not possible, but you need to think about also the potential changes in the future. How can you act upon that? And I think that's where I also tend to agree. The world moves away from that static calculator ownership model to a more hybrid and maybe flexible model where you can actually choose and at one moment say, you know what, you change the organization, the business has different needs, you need to change the calculator, but we can keep the same service level with the people because they have been trained on you, they know the processes, and we will get some experts into it who are now scaling up like you are doing as a business. I think that is one of the things where I really see a big change. Yeah, and I think that drives us nicely maybe to the next slide you've seen already as a spoiler a few seconds ago, to make a little wrap up for the people.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more thing. Payroll strategy and service delivery comes down to people, process, and tech, right? So once again, something I said in the beginning is that none of these myths kind of alone can help determine payroll health and strategy, right? You really have to look at people, process, and tech all together and understand all of the different nuances and what are the right questions to ask so that you're not making assumptions and really going down a road that's going to be extremely costly and potentially challenging for you prematurely. And so, really looking at all three of those is really, really important. And so, as we're coming to wrap up our discussion today, one thing is clear across all of these myths, there's a pattern that's the same. Is service simplicity can hide and mask hidden cost, rigidity, and risk. And so the future of global payroll is not about who has the highest SLA, the most consolidated model, or who has the broadest owned engine. It's really about building a payroll operating model that gives organizations visibility, control, flexibility, and of course, resilience. So it's important that you ask yourself that it's not simply a question of is the payroll running and are we paying people today? It's really is our model built for purpose and adaptable for what comes next for our organization. Michael, would you like to wrap things up for us?
Yeah, I think the one point, which is the first one here on the left side, I completely agree. And I think what we see, and that's also covered by the study, which we of course can share with everybody, is to measure the true health, right? And I think there are some KPIs, but there are also some things which help you maybe prepare already your decision, what direction you want to go if you start measuring it now. And that is specifically around first time right, for example. So is your payroll at the first time right? And if I've seen companies really where we made a change, we had like, I don't know, 5 to 6 payroll runs until it was the final one, until it was correct. So that is a question you need to ask yourself because normally that first time accuracy, that's an indicator on how many runs you do, how smooth is the payroll process running. So that's an easy way to measure, okay, is something going wrong here already? And that may be due to the solution, that may also be down to the process, right? Or the governance model. So that's one of the indicators I think really may help to measure the health at the moment. And of course, then looking at the payslip cost, so the total cost of payslip from a different perspective, not just what the vendor is charging per payslip, but really thinking about the total cost of ownership of a payslip. What does it cost my organization to create a correct payslip for Kira or for Michael? What does it cost me? And really bringing all these pieces together in terms of effort, in terms of corrections, reruns, and all of that. That is the real cost of a payslip. And I think you will quickly see that there is a different magnitude. Also, the impact on the business, what you described, Kira, right? So, what is the impact on productivity if I underpay somebody? There's a hit on productivity. What is the impact on the organization if I overpay somebody and I cannot get the money back? So, all these things, I think that is something we need to try to dig in deeper and put that into the total cost of ownership. And I think last but not least, that is basically the under and overpay trend to try to get a grasp on that. And I know it's difficult, right? So for an underpayment, you get immediately the escalation for the employee. We know that. So that's after the pay date or when the pay slip is distributed, you know exactly then the people are piling up and saying, hey guys, I didn't get enough. The way around, overpayment, seldomly people are coming back and saying, hey, I got overpaid, can I pay it back? So I think that is where really that we need more visibility and more digging into the detail to figure out what is going on at the organization at the moment. Because if you hear nothing in that sense, it's not a good thing. Although I know that from the past we said, well, if you hear nothing after the payroll, it's quite a good sign. Well, in the sense of an overpayment, it's probably not. So I think that is exactly where I think is helpful maybe to get that first part under control, measure the true health at the moment, then creating the visibility around these KPIs, monitoring them, getting control about the inputs. I think that is something you rightly said, Kira, right? It's most of the time we always think or thought about, and did myself as well in the past, that the input control is directly linked to the payroll engine. So that is a process driven by the payroll provider and by the payroll engine. Now, I think in a mindset, we need to decouple these things and say, can we control the inputs irrespective of the calculation engine at the back end? And there are multiple things, like you described, the governance model, the technology, and also the people you have in the service center who can help actually managing that at the front end and preventing a lot of the issues happening at the back end. And I think that is really one of the key things I'm seeing here. And then coming to the last point, so choose fit for purpose. I think that's it, right? So there is no one size fits all. I mean, this
Mhm.
is a saying we repeat every time, but it's really like that. And nowadays, the businesses are really, even in the same industries, you have so many differences in the business types, in the type how an organization evolves. Are they growing with acquisition? Are they maybe having some organic growth? Or maybe they're at the moment at a shrinking business situation, which many businesses are at the moment. So they need to think about stuff in a different direction. I think that's what you need to ask yourself before you decide, I'm going there or there. So I think I can just sign what you summarized over here. And maybe we go to question and answers now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Do we have any questions, team? Let's see. All right. I see one, which is how do you measure payroll health beyond SLA uh, accuracy? Well, once again, it really goes down to understanding your payroll process in your current landscape. Where is your team spending most of its time on? What processes? Where are they having the most challenges? Where are there the most gaps in terms of the ability to hit those SLA targets? And so, really looking at your process and how payroll runs today is going to be very telling for you of your payroll health outside of those SLA metrics, right? Because when we talk about SLA and KPIs, it's not just accuracy. There's also timeliness. There's compliance metrics. There's also like for example, off cycle, like I used to measure how many off cycles we had. We used to measure tickets that came in from employees. That could be a sign also. But outside of that, it's really just sitting down with the team and understanding when it goes wrong, where does it go wrong? And where is the most challenging process. And that will give you a good understanding of your overall payroll health. Michael, anything you'd like to add there?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly. It's linked also to what I mentioned before, and exactly these points I think you cover rightly. There's a question, what does the visibility layer looks like, and instead of reporting a data lake solution? I think it goes beyond a classical data lake or BI solution you may think about. The reason for that is obviously, I think when you think about a visibility layer for payroll, it's much more complex than a classical BI solution, which you just plug in and get some reporting and visualize it. The There are certain flavors of solutions you have. I can, of course, talk about our company. So we have like a visibility layer where you can really visualize everything what happened in the payroll afterwards. So once the payroll has been processed, and it doesn't need to be on the solutions from us, can be anywhere with any provider, just getting the information and visualizing it. And that is probably a bit similar if you think about from a dashboard perspective. Now, what we have on top of in that solution already is the reporting related to the CSRD and Payroll Transparency Act. So you will have the dashboards available there for gender pay gap, pay equity, and all of the stuff you need to report on. You will see a dashboard, what's going on in your countries, and you can act maybe even before you need to report, because I think that is the key target, not just reporting, but you want to control it. The second layer, which goes a step further, that was I mentioned a little bit with the input control. The tech layer can also be an interface, and probably that is a bit in the direction where you call about data lake, but it's more like an, I would say, control funnel where you get all the inputs in and you really make sure that you have real-time inputs. So you get the real-time control and you get an automatic check as soon as the input hits. So you send a new hire form that is checked immediately. If something is wrong, goes back, you can correct it on the day, and you don't need to wait until the HR cutoff a few days. We have a short window of time to actually do that. And then that data, all the input being sent, is delivered automatically into the payroll engines. Again, irrespective where you have that engine and who owns it. These are the kind of flavors, and of course, I mean, feel free to contact us, Kira, us, if you want to dig into that. But I think that's a short answer on what you mentioned here.
Mhm.
Anything to
Thank
add from
you.
your side, Kira?
Well, we actually are getting a lot of questions, so I'm going to jump to the next question just to be able to hit as many as we can. So we have a question in the chat that's positioned as we currently build our payroll SOPs globally. We have payroll in several countries in EMEA and different regions in Australia and US. What are your thoughts on the following statement? Don't hire a payroll specialist since that's a liability. Train several HR members to take payroll on top of their HR tasks. That sounds like someone said from a leadership or an executive standpoint that's trying to conserve cost. So here's what I would say, and we work with organizations to design their payroll orgs. There is no kind of one size fits all, and I know this is cliche at this point, but there isn't a one size fits all. If if your organization is able to manage that way, and your HR team has the needed skill sets to be able to take on the payroll tasks, then that may very well be the right solution for you. However, of course, we advocate that payroll expertise is a value add, and having payroll owned within an organization, within a payroll team, is also impactful and is a value add. That being said, if that is workable in your organization, then that may very well be the solution for your organization. But it's something that you definitely want to just sit down, really think about the pros and cons, really create a list of, well, what is this going to do to the workload of my HR team? Because guess what? Payroll isn't just pressing a button, right? I know this is cliche again. It's not just pressing a button and running an engine. There's a lot that goes into it. Let's think about that input process, right? There's so many challenges that are faced, and the input quality can really, really suffer when you have many systems, different ways of working, lots of kind of scrubbing of data and things like that. So really think about what impact will this have on the HR team in terms of how we run today, and really try to champion for that ownership, that payroll ownership and collaboration with the HR team.
Yeah.
See, we have a different question now too. I hope that answered the question. How do you see AI changing the way we manage global payroll visibility and control? That is a question that can probably have its own webinar for multiple
Yeah,
hours.
exactly. Exactly. I thought the same.
It is definitely a very hot topic. But what I can say is there's a lot of really exciting things happening around AI and payroll right now. Everything from kind of simple chatbots that help you locate data within a system, and help you answer questions like, who got a bonus over 5,000 euro over the past 6 months? Like that
Yeah.
is really, really helpful. We're also seeing AI really being built in supporting reconciliation efforts, to help spot anomalies, exception detection, and also kind of predictive AI, as well as being leveraged in payroll. Agentic AI is starting to be leveraged in payroll today. So actual AI agents who are running processes and communicating with each other, that's starting to appear. I've seen AI gross to net engines starting to be built. So there's a lot of excitement around this. And I think this year is going to be extremely telling in terms of all the developments that continue to progress in this field.
Yeah.
Michael, anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I mean it's like you said, this I mean I've seen so many things there in our organization, but also with partners and other organizations. So there is definitely, I think, AI is changing the way of payroll processing and also governance. I think in a good way, because I think a lot of the things, if I think about the work we are doing in the shared services for payroll every single month, I think a lot of things can be automated, and it really helps if you have, like you described, an agent looking up certain things you want to know every single month, right? You can configure basically your agent saying, please pop that up to me every time when I need it at a certain time in the payroll cycle in every single country, maybe consolidate it for me. You use the reporting example. I think that is a classical point which is always discussed. What is the variance reports we're getting, the reporting structures, all of that. If you think about it, and you can really say and do a prompt, get me that report from all the payroll data which is available to what you need at the moment, and that is coming at the fingertip, that will simplify, I think, a lot in payroll. Now, I
Yeah.
think to say what's possible, it comes back to what you mentioned before, and I think you also need to ask yourself, where are you as an organization? So how ready am I for these things, right? So I think it's a path. You need to build a foundation to actually go in that direction. I think that is one of the key things, with all the nice buzz around, and really, I don't think it's just buzz, right? I think it's really some opportunity in front of us with AI. You need to think about where do you stand and what's your way to leverage AI.
Oh. And just to add to that, because you just brought up something really important that I want to highlight here, implementing AI for AI's sake
Yeah,
is not going to be beneficial.
yeah,
and you might not be ready as an organization for that, right? There's several things that need to happen within an organization. You need to make sure you're working with clean data, and that your
Yeah.
data is ready for use within AI. Because if you don't have clean data, there's not gonna be any impact.
Helpful.
You need to have strong governance, right? How is that going to be managed? What is going to be the process for it? Who's going to oversee it? And alignment with your other stakeholders within your organization. If HR is implementing AI and they're not talking to payroll, that's a problem, right? There needs to be a conversation. How does it affect other departments? Are we all on board in terms of our priorities? How is this going to impact us? What changes is this going to bring to the organization? So you need to have that alignment. So clean data, strong governance and processes, as well as stakeholder alignment with and leadership buy-in as well. And once you've assessed all three, that's when you could say, okay, we want to do this and we want to do this together. And this is the impact that it's going to bring. And we are ready as an organization to do it. Not just, okay, we're going to buy this tech and roll it out and it's going to solve all our problems magically. Because that's not going to be how it plays out.
Yeah. Sure.
Um,
Maybe that last question I can do in 2 minutes, and then we have time to wrap up, maybe. So that I think that is an interesting one. So how long does it take? So if we're considering implementing UKG1 view for payroll, yeah. So I think basically it's always a question, right? So if you think about visibility, creating visibility, how far are you to actually create that? I think, and Kira, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are certain solutions available like ours where actually you can get visibility relatively quickly, and it's surprisingly quick. So in weeks and months. You're not talking about the classical duration of a payroll migration. Because at the end, what you need is the payroll output. You, of course, need to do the mapping. You need to link that to our system, the dashboards, that everything is properly set up. So that is the effort to be done. But it's a relatively quick exercise to get the visibility. Of course, then if you think about the consolidation, going the next steps into managed services and so on, that's of course taking a bit longer, and you need to prepare the organization for that and obviously getting deeper into the subject. But I think that first step, creating visibility, goes relatively quickly, surprisingly quickly. And that's why I come back to my initial saying, right? I think the approach of going step 3 first and then waiting years until the migration is done, probably the best step is to getting visibility first. And then maybe that migration you plan to do, or an outsourcing, or maybe a shared service in some countries, will reduce, where you say, I'm only doing that regionally and I'm keeping a hybrid model because, like you said, maybe 70% of the payrolls are running smooth. So why changing them? Like that's basically the short answer on that, but feel free to contact us.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael, for that. And I just want to add that, yes, well, any implementation, any system change, whether it's adding a visibility layer or doing a full kind of overhaul, requires you to make sure that you understand your current landscape. That's number one. And level of effort. Like, what is it going to mean? Like, what does it require from your team? What kind of data is needed to be able to do that? And once you understand that, then you can really do a plan for your future, and really work in partnership with the vendor that you've selected to be able to meet those go live dates and be successful, and get that visibility and reporting that you're looking for. But understand those two things: your current landscape, and also level of effort. Like, what does it mean when you're moving into this future state, for your organization, and what effort is required for you to get there. I mean, of course, there's parties out there that are able to help you with that, like my organization or other wonderful organizations out there that are there to support you, and help you get to that next phase of your payroll transformation journey. So thank you so much, for your time today. It was really fun. It was a wonderful conversation. I know everyone's eager to get to see the games, so we won't hold you too much longer. But please feel free to reach out to us. You can find us on LinkedIn, email us directly. We'd be happy to have a conversation with you, or be a sounding board for you as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was very nice talking to you, and thanks for your interaction.